So, mm, longing for this truth, longing to remember the truth of who you are. Where does this longing come from? Where does the longing come from? Who put the longing in there? Longing for something that somehow is known already, and yet cannot put words to it. And yet there is a deep sense that in the finding, it will be known. It is known, right? That the fulfillment of the longing is the felt sense of the longing feeling fulfilled. That the longing is here and the fulfillment is here. Somehow in the longing, the fulfillment is here. And yet it does not look like the mind imagines that it is going to look. Just like a caterpillar cannot imagine what it is to be a butterfly, right? Longing to be the butterfly, and yet not knowing what that could possibly mean or look like. But this willingness to let go into the unknown, into not knowing. And to let go into the unknown is to let go into silence. Let go into silence and allow the wisdom of grace to metamorphosize our perception out of the attachment to sense perception, out of the identification with mind and a sense of knowing, a sense of control, a sense of needing to understand, letting go into not knowing, the unknown, letting go into the silence, into the stillness, into the simple presence of being. That the butterfly emerges and the caterpillar is no more. You cannot be both a caterpillar and a butterfly. The butterfly emerges from the shell, the crust of the caterpillar. Magnificent and whole and free. You cannot be the caterpillar and the butterfly. If there is an attachment to caterpillar, then life will be lived as a caterpillar. If there is a following the longing without trying to fulfill it, getting the needs and desires met, if there is a willingness to rest in the unknown, in the silence, in the stillness, The butterfly is the breath of God. It is magnificence itself. It is somehow a seeming miracle how such a happening happens. And yet somehow, too, the butterfly has always been inside that caterpillar in some way, right? Just like the great oak is always inside the acorn. Nature gives us these clues. Inside what we think we are already coded to know the wholeness, because we already are the wholeness. It is about trusting the longing as an aliveness of the heart, trusting that the longing itself already knows what it is longing for. And that when we keep trying to feed the longing with this and that, we are never actually fulfilling the longing. That is why we keep looking for more and more and more. But when we actually stop trying to find what will fill the space and be the space, the stillness, the silence, the openness, the emptiness, we realize that instead of filling the space with more things, that what we are longing for is to recognize the extraordinary freedom in being the empty space, the extraordinary realization that is here in the emptiness, in the openness, in the silence of being, that we are the space. And in the remembrance of spaciousness, a sense of freedom, a sense of emerging out of the cocoon, a sense of freedom, infinite, unbounded, that which could never have been imagined from the tight little space, the limitation of mind and body. And yet somehow this butterfly of God can emerge out of nowhere, nothing, emptiness, silence. And this butterfly is your own brilliance, your own radiance, your own remembrance of divinity, the remembrance of what you truly belong to, what you are always shining as, the one, the glory. Mm. And so the brilliance is always here. The radiant light is always here, shining bright and full and whole, never diminished, never dimmed. And it is the light that is always shining, that is leading us, calling us. It is where the longing arises out of. That in truth the longing already knows. That is why when we meet just the raw aliveness of the longing, the heart is longing, it's pulled, it's being magnetically pulled. It can also feel like a devotion, full of devotion. And that devotional could seem like to a personal God or deity. It's to allow the aliveness of the devotion, not to rest anywhere, but keep that aliveness in the heart, the aliveness, because the aliveness of the longing is the knowing that is already present. We could say that when we feel such a devotion, such a love, such a pull, such a connection to any kind of being, deity, that it is the aliveness of divinity itself. It's the aliveness of what we already are. And so if we are to stay in the aliveness, in that pull, in the longing, we're opening to a finer, finer frequency. And that fine, fine frequency is a nectarine bliss. It is the very nectar, the very nourishment that we need to go deeper and deeper, to drink in the nectar of devotion, to drink in the nectar of the aliveness when there is a recognition of a frequency that brings a knowing of truth. Whether it is if we are flowing in devotion, if we are singing kirtan, if we are listening to something or watching something, when the heart comes alive, there is the grace, right? The grace is not outside of you. The grace is reflecting the aliveness of your heart, the knowing of your heart to you. And so it is in the aliveness of the heart that we deepen and we clarify and we remember. Yes, in the silence, the silent presence, the stop, the being here now. And yet in the aliveness, when the nervous system seems to be so enlivened, whatever is enlivening the nervous system to bring a sense of truth, a knowing, a recognition, it is in the aliveness that we want to be absorbed, immersed in the aliveness. And even if that aliveness feels like the aliveness of silence, the aliveness of peace, to be immersed, absorbed into. And if that aliveness is flowing dynamically within itself, we allow an immersion, absorption into the flow, to be carried in the flow of the aliveness. The nectarine bliss itself flows. It's flowing in absolute devoted surrender to itself, surrendering into itself, flowing into itself. A pure devotion. That which is in absolute devotion to itself, the self in devotion to itself, love in absolute loving devotion to itself. That the natural momentum of wholeness is to flow within itself in absolute integral remembrance of itself. And that flow, that aliveness is the the power, the force, the magnetism that keeps the light so bright. And this light, this brightness, is right here inside all that you have imagined you are. Deep in the center is this light of remembrance, this grace, deep in the heart, in the true heart, is this remembrance, and it dances as a longing. And so to come to the purity of the longing, without knowing in truth what we are longing for, without holding on to ideas, a letting go into the flow of the longing, a letting go into the current of grace, and being carried by that which the mind cannot understand. This is where true surrender happens. The sense of our humanness dissolves into the remembrance of our divinity, the one divine flow, the one divine source, the one divine light, ever bright, ever radiant, ever shining, the principle of illumination never leaves itself. The principle always remains intact. And it is the recognition as a ray of light, as a light beam. What is your source, light beam? From where are you shining? What is your source? What is the source of your radiance? What is the source of your brightness? It is to follow this moment back to its source. Follow this moment back to its source in presence. Follow the longing back to its source. And be so alive with the resonance that at the source you can feel that finer frequency, a subtler frequency, where perception shifts out of sense perception and limited perception to subtle perception, which is just consciousness, just little old consciousness, remembering itself, consciously awake to itself. Where consciousness is consciously awake to itself, reveling in the frequencies of its longing, the remembrance of its own purity is here, a remembrance of what is before all of the seeming discordance, right? The discordance and the sense of limitation of the me and the mind. What is before all of that? And so in the silence, in the stillness, the remembrance is here. The ray of light follows back to its source. From where are you shining? From where is the longing coming? From where is anything arising? What is the source of it all? We come to a not knowing once we have exhausted mental ideas, whether they be philosophical, religious, scientific, when we have exhausted all mental ideas, we find a not knowing. We find the humble truth that we don't really know anything, not for sure. What do we know for sure? What is for certain in this moment is just this presence of being, just this here now. It is the only certainty. It is the only thing that never ever moves and changes, is the silence, the stillness, this presence here now. And in this presence here now, the light beam finds its source, finds its natural radiance, is not finite or limited, that the natural radiance is indeed eternal, timeless, self-generating, and the self-generating aliveness is the power of love, the power of the glory of God, the power of the Mother. The force, the power, the force of integrity, of true integral wholeness. The power and integrity of this frequency of what the glory is, of what God is. And in the longing of the heart, we find this. When we stop trying to fulfill the longing in the play of the world, when we stop trying to fulfill the longing with things and experiences and people, we discover that fulfillment is here. And it is a fulfillment that is whole and perfect and radiant and always shining as this grace at the center of this moment, here now. There is grace right in the center of this moment. The unmoving presence is that grace. The silence is that grace. And the grace is that you can know this grace. We are fully equipped with this wisdom light shining in the longing, in the felt sense of being that knows itself just simply here now. This truth is illuminated and known. And this is all that is needed. It is this simple. Hear the freedom. Here in the silence, in the stillness. The radiant light of divinity is shining. this willingness to let go of the chrysalis, the cocoon, let go and truly shine the uniqueness, truly shine uniquely in the knowing of the whole, that we do not lose anything. The mind imagines that we will lose my life, my things, my experiences, my mind. And yet what is gained in remembrance is a freedom to allow the uniqueness to truly shine. In the belonging to yourself, can shine as yourself, radiantly on the surface of life. Embodied love, a beacon of light. When you know your source, light beam, you can truly shine because you are not distracted, trying to seek this and that and go hither and thither. You can truly shine absolutely radiant in the knowing of your eternal connection to wholeness, that you are eternally whole. You have never been lacking in any way. And so resting here in the silence, in the silent remembrance, and so to swim away from the shore, swim away from the seeming edge, is to leave the cocoon, the imagined safety, truly be immersed in the unknown, in the silence, and allow the emergence of your radiant remembering to come all the way through. It is a remembrance of what you have always been. It is a remembrance of who you were before you imagined that you became someone. So it is like a reset. Back to the original. A relaxation back to the original fine frequency. Back to the remembrance of the light of wholeness. To shine the magnificence of the being that you are. Let all that you are fill all that you have imagined yourself to be with the light that you are, the fine frequency of remembrance, saturating and permeating every cell of your being. Every cell of your being is filled with the love, the light, the fine frequency of remembrance. Mm. Just to be immersed in the finer frequency of being. Nothing to do, nothing to understand. Just to be here in the deep and glorious relaxation into the remembrance of who you have always been, that you have never left yourself. You are as you have always been. Divine wholeness is the natural purity and innocence of yourself before you imagined and dreamed yourself a world. The collapse of the dream of separation into the remembrance of wholeness. Light beam returns to its source and shines its wholeness in utter remembrance of the light that has never been dimmed, diminished, or divided in any way. Mm. 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 And so to be free, to shine, is to be free to be yourself. It is to transcend all of the ways that limitation happens, to transcend the stories of the mind, the protections, to transcend the conditionings, to transcend everything that keeps us bound in an idea of being divided and separate or somehow lacking. Mm. And yet this happens by the most incredible open acceptance. The transcendence is not to transcend to get away from. It is to see through. But in order to see through, there actually has to be a complete and utter acceptance. Because if the idea of transcendence is to get away from, that is just another strategy of the mind. And so to transcend is to open to the transcendent field, the wide open, expansive, infinite presence of being, that you are in truth the only thing that can be known. To transcend is not an experience. You are the transcendent field in truth. True nature is that you are the wide open, infinite, eternal, transcendent field. And so to transcend is to come to this revelation, this recognition in the silence, in the stillness, that there is freedom here and that you are the freedom that is always here. You are the freedom of being. You are that which is not bound or disturbed in any way by the thoughts, by the mind, by the story, by a past or an imagined future. You're not disturbed by any of the mind's meanderings. And so what a revelation to be the transcendent field, to be the wide openness, the emptiness, the spaciousness, and to recognize that as the spaciousness, you are not touched by any of the happenings. To transcend limitation and to truly be the infinite field is to realize that you are not bound by thoughts. You're not bound by the body. And yet somehow this total acceptance as life living itself of all that is, we could say free of reaction, immersed in dispassion, not moving from the patterns of limitation, not moving from the protections and conditionings. And yet it is not a mechanism of the mind to try to change, fix anything that seems to feel like a problem. That is the mind's strategy. And that strategy is a strategy that can only move within limitation. It is the releasing of all strategies to come to be the wide open infinite space, to be the transcendent field, to be the being that is natural openness, natural acceptance, natural allowing. And this is how the life flows, is in total acceptance, total open allowing, where nothing is resisted. Everything is only known from the source as emanating from the source. Everything is known as the same one. We could say everything is known as light, or everything is known as love. Everything is known as just a flow of life. So this freedom is freedom from the mind, freedom from being identified and believing the thoughts, being identified and believing I am the body, I am limited and finite. It is the discovery of the unlimited, infinite, unbounded nature. The remembrance of being the eternal, transcendent, infinite, boundless field. To really recognize the freedom here, the purity here, the innocence here, that you're not actually located at a singular point, that you are alive and free everywhere in everything. And as these words come, it is just to feel where the resonance of truth is. There is nothing to prove. Be very aware of the mind that maybe tries to imagine itself into believing that it is living what is being spoken, but that is no use to anyone. It is about being absolutely humbled to the bones of clarity, being emptied out all the way through. This is not an ascension. This is not some kind of expansion. This is about the collapse, the diminishing of all of the ego's ideas, all of the ways that the mind wants to identify and say, oh yes, yes, I am that love. Oh yes, yes, I am that expanded light. I've always known it. But be so aware of how easy it is for the mind to hook in and give itself a new identity, to give itself a new spiritual persona that is just a little brighter than the last persona. The true brilliance is in the absolute collapse of all the mind's wantings, all the mind's desires. It's in the absolute collapse. We could say that divinity is the most humble of all. That divinity itself isn't some kind of mythic idea that the mind has of what enlightenment is, or what wholeness is, or what perfection is. That in truth, divinity is this innocence, this emptiness, this openness, this purity that is absolute total acceptance, total allowing, that is just not dividing the moment. It's not a new persona. It's not a new identity. It is the end of identity, the end of the personal. It's like a rebirth into the one. And yes, there is a letting go of a certain sense of individuality, and yet the uniqueness flowers in the fertile ground of remembrance, because there's true nourishment. Where there's true nourishment, a true sense of belonging, a true knowing of connection, where the light beam knows its source, life is just living. It's not living as someone, it's living as itself. It's living as light. It's not living as someone with a new identity, someone that knows something, someone that has got something. And the true radiance flowers and comes right to the surface when there is the emptiness of heart, when the heart is empty of conditions, empty of protections, empty of personas. The light can truly shine right on the surface. And in the absence of protections, love too is all that remains. It's just a love that loves, a love that loves, that only knows itself and just loves. And so there is nothing to do, nothing to fix, nothing to be, nowhere to get to. It is just in being here now, empty. Emptiness is freedom, empty of experience, empty of story, empty of needing to know, needing to be right, needing to control, empty of guilt and shame, empty of the story of lack and deficiency, a true willingness to leave the cocoon behind, to actually allow the transmutation that is necessary to shine your essence light, unguarded, unprotected, right from the source that you are, to truly allow the light to shine. We could say that to be the light, the radiant shining light, the wide open heart, is to be in absolute, utter acceptance of all that you are, and including all of the parts that may seem like residues. It's like a total inclusivity of everything, that you don't see yourself in comparison or differentiation. You see yourself from the light of wholeness. You see yourself as the all-inclusive light. And so even if there are seeming residues and parts of yourself that haven't refined, that the absolute welcoming, allowing, accepting light sees all of that. It does not try to fix and change it, just only sees wholeness. It's this shift in perspective that allows, because there's a knowing that it does not matter if some kind of human flaw reveals itself, that what you are in truth is not that you are perfection is not the mind's idea of perfecting, is that you discover as the transcendent field perfection. You discover wholeness. You discover the wholeness that you have always been. It is the remembrance of a frequency, a remembrance of a fine frequency. And as you start resonating at the fine frequency, the human life starts to transmute itself. There's a wisdom that is moving everything. Everything starts to simplify. Things start to fall away that no longer serve. Everything reorganizes and recalibrates itself. Purification happens. Refinement happens. No one is doing it. It's not happening because there's something wrong with me. It's happening because there is an intelligence that is moving to shift the perspective and reorganize and reorient the life with its divine source. And so, yes, we lose the personal, but as we lose the personal, we discover a depth of belonging where there is no more loneliness and no more aloneness. The one is the absolute belonging, that you belong to yourself, you belong to God, you belong to the glorious grace of all that is. And here you can never be alone. Mm. Everything that is here is perfect. This moment is perfect. This moment, just as it is, total openness. You are the openness. If there is anything on the screen, okay, so what? No differentiation, no sense perception deciding, do I like it? Do I not like it? Do I need to change it? An equanimity, an openness. You're the openness. You are the wide open, transcendent field. Nothing can touch you. Nothing can diminish you. Nothing can hurt you. You are here as yourself, utterly free. And as yourself, utterly free, there is this openness that allows all that is here to just be here. Do not touch a thing. Do not try to reorganize the furniture in the room. Do not try to tidy up. Just realize that it doesn't matter where the furniture is. It doesn't matter what is here, because you are the wide open spaciousness. You're not affected by the organization of the furniture. You're not affected by where the knickknacks are placed. You're not affected by anything. You're the wide open space. You're not the content. Trying to reorganize the content doesn't bring you to freedom. The freedom is knowing that you're the space that is never touched by the content. Can keep reorganizing that furniture. You can start sending things to the thrift store. Surely there's some holiness in that. Things get simpler. Yes, it feels freer. It feels simpler. It releases a lot of the mind clutter. Less reaction, less things to trip over, less dust, less cobwebs, right? But essentially, you can keep reorganizing the furniture. But until you realize that it does not matter if there's furniture here, if there's no furniture, it doesn't matter if there's knickknacks, it doesn't matter. It just does not matter. This is the thing. The dream doesn't matter. Can keep trying to reorganize the dream, keep trying to make a better me, keep trying to make a better life. But the freedom isn't in the life. The freedom is in knowing that you are untouched by the dream. You're untouched by the furniture. You're untouched by experience. You're untouched by the content. You're the openness. And as the openness, you have absolutely nothing to say, no agenda about the content. And yet somehow miraculously, the intelligence of your wise knowing and the flow of grace reorganizes and recalibrates. And so you just actually realize that, oh, wow, this is perfect. Nothing wouldn't change a thing, not a hair out of place, right? And even if the moment reorients and suddenly it's a little more full or suddenly it's completely empty, it doesn't matter, because what you are is the wide open space. Nothing to change. You don't need to be distracted, reorienting, changing the color of the walls, right? You don't need to touch a thing. The intelligence moves things around just to see, what about if we just fill up the space with a whole load of old junk? What about now? You feeling relaxed? The invitation is to recognize, yeah, untouched, unmoved, does not matter. Yeah, let's bring a whole load of dogs in to live here, right? Still happy? Still untouched? Right. What about a children's tea party? Right? All sorts of stuff stuck in the carpet. Still okay? Sure. Right? It doesn't matter. You move from reaction to non-reaction. It doesn't matter. You're not the things, you're not the events, you're not the happening. You're the space in which life is flowing. You're the screen on which the images appear. The freedom comes in realizing that you're never touched, you're never disturbed. Oh, look, here comes your whole family. They're coming to stay for 3 weeks. What about now? How does the space feel, right? The ultimate test. Yeah, everyone's coming. Every living member coming together under the same roof. What about now? What about now? You're the space. You're not the character. You're not the happenings. You're not the events. It doesn't matter. And the measure is, how much love is here? How unaffected are you? How non-reactive are you? Right? And it's not about the mind that might measure, oh, you got reactive, oh, you're getting, your controls coming in, you're getting frustrated, you're getting annoyed. It doesn't even matter if those things happen because you're the space. You're not the reaction. And yet the deeper that you fall into the knowing of what you are in truth, the happenings start to shift. The simplicity and spaciousness just starts to be the norm. Because a recalibrating happens. There's less to trip over. We're just not attracted to the drama. We're not attracted to having another barbecue, another potluck, right? We're just not drawn to it because it just doesn't matter. Nothing matters. All that matters is this remembrance. And life is living itself and the flow flows on. And life is living itself and the flow flows on. And the knowing of who you are. It is as if the knowing of who you are, the resonance of remembrance starts to affect the surface of life. And so, yes, the life does start to change, but it starts to change in ways you can't imagine. Just as when you've been a caterpillar, squiggling and squirming around, right? Your mode of living, what you eat, how you see, your perspective of seeing is all about wiggling and inching around, right? What happens as the butterfly? How does your perspective shift? That you're flying free and you can flitter and flutter and land here and there, gather a little sweetness, transmute and digest a little sweetness, flitter and fly and take in a little sweetness here. But you keep it simple, right? the whole perspective shifts. You're free. Stay a while. Move on. See it from this perspective, that perspective. You're not bound, right? So it's about allowing the perspective to shift. You have no idea what that new perspective looks like, but it's just allowing life to live itself. And you're always the space. You're never the character. You're neither the caterpillar or the butterfly. But the perspective of life as the butterfly is closer to the perspective of life while there's still a human body and still life to be lived. Live as the butterfly. And when the body drops, a graduation, you're still flying free, eternal light.